Justin Giddings here, the Kickstarter guy, and welcome to another video in the 30 crowdfunding training videos in 30 days series. I always have to stop and think about that because I know I'm gonna stumble over that once. Today's gonna be a quick one. I had a couple of people ask over the last couple videos have been Kickstarter versus Indiegogo versus seed&spark, and I kept mentioning something called fiscal sponsorship, and a couple of people in my world were like, what's that? So quick video on what is fiscal sponsorship, and then I'll give you sort of my personal opinion on if and when it's a good time to utilize it. So fiscal sponsorship is moderately simple. The idea is that a lot of arts organizations, theaters, that kind of stuff, they're nonprofits, and so when people contribute to them, those nonprofits, they get the person contributing it gets a tax write-off, and the nonprofit receiving it gets some tax sheltering. They don't have to pay income taxes on that. This is kind of mostly, I'm sort of speaking broadly. And so wouldn't that be great if small independent projects could get that sort of benefit of being able to go to particularly wealthy people and offer a write-off? Wouldn't that be lovely? The problem is that setting up a 501c3, which is America, the United States version of nonprofit, and there's various kind of things around the world. It's usually a pretty long legal process. You have to make the thing, you have to get approved, there's paperwork that goes into that. Oftentimes there's legal fees connected to that. And so a one-off project, especially like in the film world or a play or a dance or something like that, it's not always really in the creator's interests to go through that whole process. So along comes this thing called fiscal sponsorship, where companies who have gone through that process and are nonprofits sort of adopt or sponsor a campaign or a creator or a specific project and say, hey, for a fee, you can funnel all of your funds through us. We'll distribute the funds to you. Usually they're distributing it as a 1099 or an independent contractor. So it's still income, by the way, to you eventually, but they're kind of like handling the back end, the paperwork. We'll send them the receipt that they can use to write off their taxes. You do all that, and we'll charge you a percentage of the money that comes in, usually around 7%. At least this is the one I've seen the most, 5 to 7%. I'm sure there are others that are lower and higher, but that's kind of the standard average. So the theory, at least, is that you take a crowdfunding campaign, you get a fiscal sponsor for your crowdfunding campaign, and now all of a sudden everybody who contributes can get a tax write-off. I actually did this for my first 2 campaigns. So some of the opinions I formed are from having done it myself, let alone, of course, seeing my clients do it. So the first 100K we raised, both of them were sponsored by a company called Fractured Atlas. Google them, you can find them. And on the second campaign, this was not a great idea. Fractured Atlas at the time had their own sort of crowdsourcing internal platform. And so we thought, we'll put all of our wealthy backers through there so that it's just really easy and simple, and it basically cut down on some paperwork. And then all of our regular backers through the main campaign. What ended up happening is we had a split campaign, and so both of them looked like they didn't hit their goals. We still got the funds because it was on Indiegogo and all this kind of stuff, but I wouldn't recommend doing split campaigns of any kind, which is a question I get every once in a while. Hey, can I run a Kickstarter and an Indiegogo and just kind of cover both audiences? No, you don't want to do that. So how you get a fiscal sponsor is that there's some sort of application process. Some of them are very basic and don't take very long at all, and it's basically like an email approval. Some of them are very, very extensive. I believe Film Independence Fractured Atlas's was. For example, the Fractured Atlas, and this might have changed, but just as a kind of an example, we had to basically deliver this whole package, almost like a grant proposal of what it is that we were doing, why we wanted to do it, all that kind of stuff. At the end of every month, they have a big board meeting where they take that information and decide whether or not they want to be a sponsor of that campaign. And then after that, you have to start running decisions through them as it relates to your project, which kind of brings me to the pros and cons of fiscal sponsorship. So the kind of obvious pro is that you can tell people that it's a write-off when they contribute to your campaign. That's pretty awesome. And especially for potentially larger backers, that can be a really, really big incentive. I guess that's kind of the only pro when I'm really thinking about it. Sometimes there's a little bit of like brand co-opting. So like Film Independent is a really respected name in the independent film community. They host the Spirit Awards. They're so if you've got a Film Independent approved project and you've got fiscal sponsorship for them, co-opting, but you're a no name, right? So co-opting some of their brand recognition may also be really, really helpful. Let me talk about some of the cons and challenges though. So for one is the whole tax write-off thing is not as great as it may sound, in that most people won't care. So even if I'm giving you $100 or $500 which for a lot of people would be considered a big contribution, I might only get $50 off my taxes or something like that. Like, it's not a big number, especially considering that for a lot of people taking, quote, the standard deduction, it's not even going to really count anyway. So it's not really increasing their tax write-off-ability stuff, right? For larger backers, totally can be a huge incentive. We definitely got a lot of people on our campaigns, and I've seen clients that have gotten larger people because of the tax write-off. However, usually that's because of personal outreach. So they have a wealthy family member, they have a wealthy contact, and this is kind of an easier way to sort of broach that subject. For them, yeah, sure, it starts being valuable for them, especially however they've got their assets set up for them to have a significant write-off, $5,000 or something like that. That's a significant write-off. The sort of challenge that comes up there is connected to the fact that these platforms charge fees. So what I mean by that is that it used to be you could have a campaign integrated with your platform. So with Fractured Atlas, we had an integrated platform in Indiegogo, and so every single dollar that came in had a flat rate of 7%. So we got to keep everything above that. We didn't have to worry about merchant fees or platform fees. Like, it kind of was one coherent package. That might still exist for a couple of things here and there. It might frankly be one of the reasons that if you're doing a very small campaign and you also want that write-off ability, Indiegogo may be a good place to go, particularly with very specific fiscal sponsors like Fractured Atlas. Everywhere else, they don't officially allow them, in the sense of you're not going to have any sort of integration. You can have a fiscal sponsor where you put their bank information into the platform's back end, and the platform sends them the money. But usually what then happens is the platform sends them the money less all the fees, like the 5% platform fee, the merchant processing fee. So it's like 7 or 8%. Then they send that money to your fiscal sponsor, and then your fiscal sponsor sends it to you after taking another 7% fee. So now right out of the gate, you're like 15%. This is even before fulfilling perk costs. You're like 15% has gone out the door to fees, essentially. And so you've sort of doubled your fee with a fiscal sponsor. At least this is the case 90% of the time. I always tell a client, go and talk specifically to the fiscal sponsor, and you can possibly even negotiate this. Hey, we expect to raise this amount of money. Can we renegotiate that particular fee before you get kind of anything in writing? Who knows? They might do it. So then the challenge. So what I often recommend people, because if the $1,000 and less people aren't going to care about the tax write-off, then, and that's going to be 98% of your backers, it kind of seems silly that you're paying 7% on all that money so you can get maybe a $2,500 or $5,000 contribution, where, again, you're still going to have those fees and costs and stuff. Anyway, so what I often tell people is, if you can get a pre-commitment of a certain amount of money from maybe some of these larger backers, maybe the parents, maybe the wealthy family members or contacts. If you do all that before the campaign, I could see a world where fiscal sponsorship makes sense, and you're kind of running tandem in like this, for example. So let's say you want to raise $40K total, and you go to grandpa and mom and dad and a family lawyer friend who helped raise you, and you're able to pull together $10,000 in promised contributions. Well, instead of asking for $40K on the campaign, what I usually recommend my clients then is go ahead and ask for 30, or if you're going to ask for 40, use that money as a matching contribution. Like, basically use that money as a way to inspire other people to give more money. And so yes, you'll end up paying the fee on that, but it's helped you raise so much more money that it ends up being worth it, and you didn't pay an extra fee on all that extra money, right? Because you're not going through the fiscal sponsor. So basically, you've got a fiscal sponsor that most of them can take direct contributions, but you don't connect your campaign to the fiscal sponsor, so that you avoid paying that money twice. One other sort of con, sort of the final con about fiscal sponsors, is that they have a fiduciary duty to make sure everything's on the up and up. So some of those companies take them really, really seriously, and the ones that don't, you kind of got to question, why aren't you? So Fractured Atlas is a really good example. Every single time we wanted to get a perk approved, we had to submit, or a reward, we had to submit that to them. They had to approve it, and they also had to decide how much of that was actual physical goods that they were going to receive, which they can't write off, and how much of that was essentially a profit margin, or that they're not receiving something for that, and then they can write that off. So if I'm offering a DVD for $100, not a great idea, by the way, but just as an example, the physical costs of the DVD to get that to them and print it, let's say it's $5, the person doing the write-off can only actually write off 95%. $95. They don't get to write off that $5. This can be a very slow process. It was with Fractured Atlas, and really sort of soured my experience working with them and with sort of fiscal sponsors in general. Is like, we would have an inspired idea about a reward or a perk or something like that, and it would sometimes be 5 business days before that process would happen, where we would get approval and then we could post it and that kind of thing. So like, by that point, especially if you're reacting to something that's sort of topical. For example, during our second campaign, the big famous potato salad Kickstarter was happening. So we thought it would be fun to like kind of co-opt some of that momentum, get some search engine optimization, do our own version of a potato salad thing. But frankly, by the time it got back to us and was approved, the moment had passed, and we just kind of looked like weird, dumb copiers. Right? So you can kind of see how that isn't too helpful. The other thing too is that like your communication has to be on point. My second campaign, this is my personal campaign. We were going to launch on a Tuesday because, as if you've seen the video, that's the best time to launch. But I woke up Monday morning to discover we had already launched and were receiving contributions. What's happened? What happened? Well, that's because we had sent our campaign to our fiscal sponsor to get that final approval, because that's something you have to do. And instead of saying, yeah, you're good, they just launched. They launched the campaign without our authorization. And at that point, you can't like go back and cancel it. It becomes this whole mess. And so we just had to live with it. But imagine, right, you've done all this work. You've hired me, or you've got my course, or you've done a ton of research, or you've gone through these videos, and then you get to, and you're building towards this launch day, and then all of a sudden, like, oh crap, nope, you've already launched. That's problematic. So the communication has to be there. It doesn't generally allow for a ton of flexibility. It can cost you a lot of money. It doesn't really help you get backers at the like $500 level below anyway, which is where most of them are going to come from. And a lot of people then just rely on it's a tax write-off is the thing that's going to sell it, when it won't for most of your people. So go back in this video. I talked about the times where that might be valuable and how you could sort of integrate it into your strategy, but my kind of general personal opinion is that fiscal sponsors, at least in terms of being connected to the crowdfunding campaign, where they are getting, especially if they're getting an extra fee on top of the fees related to the crowdfunding campaign, not worth it. Not the value you're getting out of it is like financially, like arithmetic on paper is not worth it. You're losing money by having them come in relative to what you're gaining for most people, for most clients. So of course, take this information, do your own research. I have myself raised $100,000 with a fiscal sponsor. I've got other clients who have, but you just want to go into that situation smart and knowing that like, this is not just, hey, we've got a write-off, and then that's going to bring the traffic running. It just becomes one more part of your narrative, one more tool in the toolbox. All right, I hope you got something out of this. More videos coming down the line. Let's see, I started writing down some stuff. I'm going to talk about how do you face the dreaded mid-campaign plateau, how you can write really high-quality social media posts without being a professional copywriter or a professional social media person. That's the 2 headlines I have right now. There'll be a ton more. I've got like 12 hours of content in my course. I'll definitely be pulling some awesomeness. But in the meantime, if you're listening to this or watching it, please respond with comments, questions, shares. Let's get this out there. And of course, I can answer anything that pops up. All right. Peace. See you later. Bye.